Positive Kids is going to speak on. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Can you guys hear me okay?
I can definitely hear you.
Lovely.
And then Lexi, I saw you came back in the backstage, so if you can just definitely head over to the comments and reply to those directly, I would be greatly appreciative of it. And we are giving away that 30-minute session with Lexi, so head over and make sure you, if you're interested in winning that, post in the comments and drop any other questions over there. I will let you introduce yourself, but I just want to say I'm so excited. I think I am 5 foot, almost 11. My daughter's dad is about 6'3", and I think when I came across her, when we connected online, it was just so empowering to hear and get the tools that I needed to be able to kind of communicate with my daughter about, again, like people don't realize, like, oh, you're so big. Like I hated hearing that as a kid. And again, I want her to embrace her height and I want her to embrace her beauty, like those types of things. And so I know that might not be specifically what you're talking about, but I know that was where I really connected with you. So I'm so grateful for your time. So we're going to let you take it over with food neutrality begins at birth and how cultivating healthy relationships with food will help you raise body positive kids. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nikki. Hi, everybody. Thank you guys so much for having me here today. Really excited to be here, really excited to be chatting with you all. My name is Riley Peterson. I am a registered dietitian and I am the owner of Raising Body Positive Kids. Let me go ahead and get my screen shared for you all. Let's see. Give me one moment.
And then, Lex, or Riley, are you on a Mac by chance?
I am.
Okay. So you would need to allow in your preferences, Chrome to do a screen share. If you go to preference, you might even get kicked out and have to come back on to share.
Okay.
Or you could email it to me really quickly and I could pop it up when you could kind of start and I could.
No, that's okay. I'll just go ahead and chat with you guys if that's okay.
Yeah. No, sorry.
That works. I don't have too much information. If anything, it's just a good way to kind of get some of the info on a screen. I can share the slides afterwards, and I'll send you some links. So if you want to share some links with everybody here, they can access some of my content.
And like I said, we're going to recap and transcribe all of this too. So
beautiful. No, I'll just go ahead and get started. Quickly, just want to introduce myself. Like I mentioned, my name is Riley. I'm a dietitian and the owner of Raising Body Positive Kids. Ultimately, I created this company with the one goal of just kind of helping provide parents the resources and information that they need to help cultivate healthy relationships with food, health, body image in their kids. Because I think we can all understand there are a ton of challenges that make it really difficult for kids to develop healthy relationships with food as they get older. We've got diet culture and social media, crazy, unrealistic beauty standards. Like Nikki mentioned, just kind of like no lack of understanding on like what's okay to say and what's not okay to say. I felt it in myself growing up. And to be quite honest, I don't really know a whole lot of people who didn't feel these challenges. So friends, family members, strangers, my audience, they all kind of tell me the same thing. Building healthy relationships with food is really hard. Building healthy relationships with our body image can be really hard. And ultimately, we're starting to see this affect our kids as well. And it's starting to affect them earlier and earlier and earlier. So I like to work with parents to kind of nip this in the bud as early as we can. In this role, I kind of help parents reshape the way they feel, act, talk around food and size. Ultimately, it's my opinion that we can create new standards of beauty or I guess kind of expand the standards of beauty and kind of change the way that we talk about food and body image with kids, and hopefully create some more healthy relationships with food and body image in future generations to come. And ultimately, my goal as well is to kind of help parents heal some of those damaged and challenging relationships with those things as well. So I want to do two things today. I don't need to share these slides because it's pretty straightforward. I want to kind of discuss one kind of principle that I think is the foundation for building healthy relationships with food. And I want to teach you a couple strategies that you can use to get started using this principle today. But before we get into the how and the strategies, I want to talk about the what, this principle, and this principle is called food neutrality. And so it's a really interesting thing that parents can use to help teach healthy relationships with food, to avoid, any negative, charged, emotional reactions to food in kids as they grow up. Ultimately, it's really simple. It's the practice of removing food labels from the food we eat, right? So good, bad, junk food, superfood. Ultimately, our goal is to create as neutral of an environment around food as possible. So therefore, we're creating kind of an even playing field between all foods. So I recommend this strategy because I want to avoid teaching kids these charged associations that we can assign to food. The things that can result in emotional eating, food fixation, food aversion, guilt, shame, all those uncomfortable feelings around food. And I'll kind of give you an example of how this works in practice. So think about dessert, right? We all love dessert. We all, it's some of our favorite foods. Yet we also label it as junk food. It's bad for us. We shouldn't have too much of it. So when we pair these kind of two things together, this can lead to feelings of guilt and shame when we eat a little bit too much of it or have dessert too frequently. So instead, I'm trying to recommend that in kids, we create more neutral associations with dessert. So, rather than putting these food labels on food as we present them to our kids, we can just acknowledge and be neutral about it. So here's your dessert. We're going to have a little bit of it. We can explain that by saying, too much dessert can make our tummies not feel so great. And so here's how we can kind of build this relationship with food and how frequently we consume it on any given basis. But just tweaking this language here and there can really help us practice this essential idea of food neutrality. And it gives parents this kind of neutral environment for their kids to learn from. And so now, when it comes to the strategies of how we use this principle in practice, I know you are all new and expecting moms. Maybe you've had experience with kids in the past, but ultimately I know that this principle can feel a little foreign and unfamiliar to parents. And so I think it's awesome that we get to start as early as we can to practice this principle. So by the time that our kids are eating solids, communicating and using verbal language around food and listening to the language that you use, we've really become seasoned experts by this point. So now let's get into a couple of the strategies that I like to use and that I like to recommend to parents to use to practice this principle of food neutrality. The first principle, just as food neutrality is kind of removing labels from food, is the actual practice of removing the labels from our language, right? So the good, the bad, the healthy, and the unhealthy. And this is especially important for you new and expecting moms because it takes some practice. A lot of these words come to us very subconsciously, and we just are so used to labeling foods and kind of putting them into these individual boxes. But in reality, when it comes to food, there are good and bad sides to everything we eat, right? All foods ultimately can fit into a healthy diet. And I think sometimes this gets a little lost on people. We get really focused on wanting to eat healthy and clean. And we want to make sure we're not eating too much of the junk food, the bad food. But ultimately, that's eliminating that principle of food neutrality. So if we kind of put foods all in the same playing field, we remove those food labels, we consider health beyond just our physical health, but we also consider our emotional and social and mental health. This can kind of help us put this into practice. And you have plenty of time now to practice that strategy, removing those food labels from our language. So by the time you're explaining these kind of trends of eating, we eat lots of fruits and vegetables, we don't eat so much dessert and high sugar foods, then we can kind of, I guess, already have practiced the fact that we explain the why versus just labeling them as black and white. And so this is a really straightforward way of kind of practicing food neutrality. A second strategy might come a little bit later, but ultimately you can continue to practice that, this skill as your kids grow up. I know if you listen to Katie Ferraro's presentation today, you're probably already kind of tuned into this idea, but you can also practice food neutrality by exposing your kids to a variety of foods as they start to learn how to eat. This is important in practicing food neutrality, and it all comes down to your poker face. So when you offer 100 foods to your kid in 100 days, you want to make sure that you're offering all of these foods to your kids with the exact same energy. So broccoli gets the exact same energy as yogurt, as does maybe a chocolate chip cookie, as does maybe, beef or pork. All of these foods are going to get the exact same energy, no matter how you kind of rate them on a scale of healthy or unhealthy. And so, it's also important to consider this when your kids react to food. So if your kid doesn't like a food, don't react. Keep that poker face going. Just acknowledge it and move on. If they love that food, same thing applies. Poker face, acknowledge it, and then move on. You want to kind of create that neutral energy around food, and the way you react to food and the way that you present food is going to play into the way that your kid learns to associate foods with certain feelings. So you want to avoid any strong reactions in response to their food, and this will help create that neutral environment for them to learn from. It will also kind of give them some more autonomy and independence in the relationships with food that they start to form early on. And last, while this isn't really necessarily a food neutrality strategy, it plays into reinforcing body positivity and the way that our kind of relationships we build with food and the way we feel about ourselves are kind of interrelated. One of the most important things that I can recommend to parents and new parents is to understand that, kids hear everything we say, right? And so to teach body positivity and to reinforce these ideas, I think it's really important for parents to be careful about the language they use in front of their kids, especially when it comes to things like size, appearance, diet, and weight loss. Totally normal for sometimes us to just make a comment, oh, I don't like the way I look in these clothes, or, oh, I could use lose a couple pounds here and there. We say it out loud. We don't think too much about it, but sometimes our kids can catch on, right? And so we don't want to teach our kids to normalize these negative self-talk behaviors, the dieting, the attempted weight loss. Ultimately, if we're not too careful, these behaviors that kids learn can escalate pretty quickly. They can potentially lead to some disordered eating patterns. And that can, that's something we want to avoid, right? And so trying to prevent them from learning these behaviors in the first place is a really important way to teach them body positivity and body neutrality as well. So just being neutral about their bodies, as well as the way they talk about and interact with their food as they grow up. So it's important to keep these comments to ourselves if we can. It's also important to avoid these comments about others around your kids. So these comments can easily slip out. You don't like that person's outfit. Maybe they've got a funky haircut going on, and maybe you don't even mean it negatively, but you do comment on someone else's appearance. Just like we want to avoid exposing kids to our negative self-talk and weight talk and diet talk, we also want to avoid teaching them and exposing them to talking negatively about others. So research shows that kids as young as 5 years old are starting to demonstrate biases towards others based on size and appearance alone. And so we have a responsibility as adults to do what we can to prevent these biases from forming and to kind of give them a more positive or a more neutral even environment to learn from. And we can do that simply just by keeping those comments to ourselves. And again, as new and expecting moms and parents, we can really start to practice this early. So by the time our kids are able to notice, we are seasoned experts. And these are some of the really straightforward ways that we can prevent this from happening.
I think you nailed that one when you said, I think a lot of that has to do with us, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It's not so much. Yeah. And I didn't mean to cut you off there. but that
Oh,
definitely
that's okay.
resonated.
No, I was just gonna wrap up by sharing, if you want to learn a little bit more, I will drop my contact information so that way you are able to access those links. I'll send that to you right now, Nikki. But ultimately, if you want to learn more from me, you can visit my website. It's balanceLifeNutritionConsulting.com. I also have a free digital guide if you want to learn more about food neutrality, creating a food neutral household. I'll also drop that link, and you can find me on Instagram at Raising Body Positive Kids.
Yay. And I promise you will not be disappointed. Sign up for her emails too. I hate emails. I get so many of them, but I take the time to read yours, and I can't tell you, I think obviously it's personal because of the situation effects of even I had to take a hard look at myself after reading through some of your content and things that you had, these kids don't just come up with this information. They're getting it from somewhere, and it's likely from us. So we all need to take a hard look at what we are saying, whether it's I just don't even like this shirt, or, whatever it might be, just little things. I've really changed how I talk about myself, and I can see a difference. And then there's also just those external factors that I'm still working against, but it's definitely made a huge difference. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Nikki. Thanks for having me too. It was great to